Gentlemen, welcome to Halloween Daily, where every day is Halloween. Thanks for hanging out and
Amazing.
talking to us today.
Absolutely. I love the entire setup you've got there. It's very, very impressive.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, this is my office, and like I said, every day is Halloween for us. So um,
Incredible.
it's
Incredible.
it might be March as we're speaking on the calendar, but that doesn't matter. It's October
Yeah.
in my brain
Yeah.
anyway.
Every day is Halloween. We love it.
That's right. So we are here today talking about your new feature film, Night Shift, which I watched this week, and I really enjoyed it. It falls in that subgenre, I would say, of motel horror, which is adjacent to, but not the same as hotel horror, which is another kind of subgenre. So I'm going to start here as co-writers and co-directors of the film. Can you give us a little idea of the origin of where this story comes from? I don't want to spoil anything here, but it's a little twisty. Um, and can you tell us a little bit about where this came from, and if uh, any of the scary motels in cinematic history might have served as any bit of inspiration along the way too?
I think the idea, Matt, came about because even if one is impervious to believing in ghosts, um, it's like you always know somebody who does believe or who claims to have seen a ghost, and it is actually like a widespread phenomenon. People that you trust, siblings, spouses, co-workers. And so we kept asking ourselves, why is that? Especially when it comes to horror, believing in ghosts. And then that kind of led to another question, which was, what is a ghost? And so I think that was something that was the jumping off point
Yeah.
for writing and for making Night Shift.
And then to apply that to a motel setting, which is so familiar to audiences. So it's like, well, how do we tell a fresh perspective on this type of device? How can we introduce a motel horror story, but subvert audiences' expectations? Like take a narrative and just kind of flip it on its head, play with like some of the themes and just do things a bit differently. And that was a real challenge, particularly because we're all, as you've seen the film, it's just one setting. So it's like to keep that engaged, to keep an audience engaged, to keep them the horrors alive, the levity alive, and the scares and the twists. It was a fun challenge, and hopefully we managed to do it.
Well, yeah, and I like films like this sometimes where it is that contained setting, and yeah, you never really leave the motel, and it's just a few characters, so it really leans
Yeah.
hard on the actors, of course. Your casting is so important, and casting the right people. So can you talk a little bit about that, about finding the right cast, and you mentioned how challenging it was to maintain that. Was that the most challenging part? Because I was going to ask that. Was that the most challenging part of the shoot?
I think so with the motel, even like the location, like because most motel horror movies are either set in like the woods or perhaps even a mountain location. So we wanted to do the desert to kind of give it a fresh perspective, really harness on those neons and those colors that have themes as well, and sort of tap into the giallo aspect. Um, yeah, and also like to convince that it was a desert setting, because we didn't actually shoot it in a desert. We actually shot it like in an industrial state. So we had like a hospital, a abandoned building, a train station with a train going past every half an hour. So we had all these like obstacles we had to work around to give the impression that we were isolated.
When it came to cast as well, Matt, I mean, particularly with Phoebe Tonkin, who's just absolutely tremendous. It's difficult with a role like this because Phoebe's on screen for 95% of the time, and like there are a vast number of scenes where she's literally just by herself. And so not only do we need an actress that had great talent like Phoebe does, but somebody with tremendous screen presence who could hold the audience's attention from beginning to end. And then also, without spoiling what goes on, but when the twists and turns do happen, somebody who can carry that. And so we were extremely fortunate to get Phoebe, and we thought she was yeah, just wonderful in the role.
Yeah. And even with like the supporting characters as well, like Lamorne, usually in any other kind of setting, you'd expect some creepy old man to be running a motel. And we were like, well, what happens if it's Lamorne Morris who's running a motel, And it's just like it really sort of subverts those expectations and flips it on its head and gives us a fresh perspective on a familiar trait.
Oh, totally. And I agree with you, about the cast and especially Phoebe, yeah, because she is, like you said, on screen in almost every frame and
Yeah.
and really leans a lot on her. So Great job on her part, and great job on your part for finding
Thank you.
the right actress for the part. And again, without spoiling anything, could you tell us a little bit about, when you do have a film that, is subverting expectations, and there might be a twisty moment here or there, knowing when, is it too soon to do this? Is it too late to reveal this? With trying to find that sweet spot, which again, without spoiling anything, I think you guys have succeeded in that. But can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, it's about making it believable for the audience and earning the payoff,
Yeah.
and sort of like laying out the pace, building the tension and suspense, and then I'm not giving anything away too soon, but also when the how do I say it, when the twists and shocks do kind of come, that we still have plenty of room to play with, and again to like shift perspectives, and it kind of goes a little bit more into giallo mode, slasher territory a little as well. And I mean, shooting those scenes as well was the most fun, because then you can really kind of let loose, if you know what I mean. It's like a ghost story for a certain while, and then it kind of lets loose. Yeah, it was just so. I mean, we shot the film in 17 days, which is
Wow.
a short shoot, shooting it at night, but we loved every second of it.
Also, audiences are incredibly smart. They've seen many, many films, many genre films. So it's like, how do you try and stay one step ahead, and finding that right moment to allow them to have payoffs, even if it's moments of levity or a scare here. It's like, when are those exact moments? So it's just being very meticulous with those details, and to always pay respect to the audience.
Absolutely. And can you talk a little bit about, as brothers working together? And I'm sure you probably get asked this all the time, but I'm legitimately curious and fascinated what the dynamic is like with you guys. Like on set, for example, are you like finishing each other's sentences, or is it more of a divide and conquer type scenario where you're each taking different jobs and be able to do it in half the time in that way?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good question.
we always, I mean, two heads are better than one. At least we like to believe that. So
Yeah.
it is a strange answer to give, because I think as twins, it's almost it's difficult to explain, because we're so used to it, because we don't know any other way since birth, and of course we're inseparable, and fortunately we get along like a house on fire. So when we were working on the film, it was only beneficial and seamless, the relationship, and that only helped us execute our vision. Really, there was no room for conflict.
Yeah, I always felt like there was just two of us. We didn't have like assign ourselves specific roles, though. You handle this or you handle this, like one handle crew, one handle actors, but it was always just us there, sort of just bouncing off each other, and hopefully being, like Paul said, two heads better than one, or our two heads make up one.
Yeah, barely. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We loved it.
And you've said already that it was a lot of fun, and you loved every minute of it. Is there one memory in particular that was your favorite moment on set?
I don't know, maybe seeing the ghosts in makeup, I think, for the first time.
Yeah.
Our makeup artist did
Yeah.
such a tremendous job. I remember at one point I had to, again, try not to go into spoiler territory, but I had to stand in a small dark room with three ghosts. And while we were waiting for a set up outside, and we couldn't leave. There's no lights on in the room, and I just remember, like, I was starting to get scared. I mean, I knew the actors, I knew their names. They were like three wonderful people, but just standing in a dark room with looking at those makeup effects up close, it gave me a shiver without a shadow of a doubt.
I think for me as well, it would have been the sinkhole in the swimming pool, because that was created, by our wonderful production designer, who didn't have that much resources, and she managed to do this just wonderful job of really making it look like there was a sinkhole in this pool. So much so that the motel owner, he came by on set that day and looked in and saw it, and legitimately thought that we had ruined his pool, and started screaming his head off. We're like, no, it's just production design, and luckily managed to calm him down a bit. But I thought, yeah, that was really terrific, particularly seeing it on camera as well, and just knowing like how that was done. Yeah, that's a favorite of mine.
Very cool and very effective. I was also going to ask if either of you, as we're recording this and as viewers are watching this, the film is out now. on VOD and in theaters. And it's basically as the title suggests, it's the first night of this young woman's new job of working the night shift at a creepy motel. So I was going to ask you guys in real life, have you guys worked a night shift similar to this in your experience?
I've worked in a couple of bookstores, and one was back in England, and it was in a massive department store, and I worked the night shift there. Fortunately, I worked with about 5 or 6 other individuals, but the building was huge. And so at times when we had to go to the basement, we would always ask a coworker to accompany us because, it was still frightening to go down to this huge building in the dark and sort of rattle around in there. So I think that definitely sort of planted the seeds for maybe where the story came from.
Yeah, I remember many years ago, I used to work on ships, like around like oil rigs and things, and it was just like very like hard manual labor work. And on this one particular job, I did it for a couple of years, and I was on the ship, and the captain said that the boat was haunted like halfway through our job and refused to sail anymore, and so the whole thing got abandoned. I just found that to be such a unique perspective because he was the one who was alone at night manning the boat when everyone else was asleep. And so I was like, is this man's imagination getting the better of him? And he's like a qualified, individual and had a great wealth of experience. But or was there something sinister there in play? I don't know. But it was fascinating.
Very interesting. Very cool. I love that. Now, and if you'll indulge us for just a few minutes before we let you go, because again, every day is Halloween for us. So I'm always curious. And with you guys being from the UK, what was Halloween like for you growing up? Did you celebrate like we do? Did you look forward to it, or did you just look over at us and be like, what are they doing over there in America?
We looked across the pond at you, and with eyes were green with envy. Particularly just as 2 massive horror fans who, ever since we saw Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one when we were 6 years old, and just were beside ourselves. It was, and we tried to, every Halloween we would try to encompass it. We watch, horror marathons. We would still dress up. We would still try and go get chocolate and candy and what have you, even if nobody else was playing ball. And so coming over here and having lived here for a few years now, because living in Los Angeles, words cannot express how wonderful it is to be a part of the way that Americans celebrate Halloween.
No one just doesn't celebrate it the same. I think even when we were kids, we used to on Halloween watch Joe Bob on Monster Vision on Channel 5 because that was the only way we could be sort of subjected to this American culture of it and just devour all these films we've never heard of before and just like soak them in. I think that was our only escape, really, wasn't it, on Halloween? But we came over here and celebrate it enormously.
That is so cool to hear. And again, I love that you're horror fans too. And we've talked to so many people that it does kind of go hand in hand, and not for everybody, but for a lot of people we talk to that make horror movies, that Halloween was in a lot of ways kind of their way in, or sometimes vice versa. Yeah. But and it certainly sounds that way with you guys, and the fact that you would still celebrate and get dressed up and try to go trick or treating, even if, like you said, nobody else is participating in your neighborhood. So I'll ask what I ask everybody then. What is your favorite Halloween costume that you've worn, and your favorite Halloween candy?
I mean, recently, last Halloween, me, my wife, and my 2 daughters, we all went as skeletons from Karate Kid, and I think it just looked cool because we had the 4 of us, and we did the face paint. My wife did the face paint, and I absolutely love that. And I think that's probably my favorite costume.
Yeah, I'd say mine is, I know it's an obvious one, but it would probably be Ghostface. I know with like the recent Scream movies that have come out, so I've luckily worn that the past couple of years and just sort of really got into it because that one never fails, that costume.
Yeah, in terms of, Halloween candy, by the way, I've got a massive sweet tooth. I'm admitting too much here, but voraciously just like burn through those buckets. You know what I mean? Whatever's in there, I'm going to eat it. So I love it.
Yeah, I go with anything Haribo.
Excellent, excellent. I love that. And you guys mentioned seeing that when you were at the impressionable age of 6 and it making such a big impression. Um, are there other horror films that served as some inspiration for Night Shift when you were going into that? Because as I said, it is kind of in this tradition of motel horror, and
Yeah.
and there have been some notable ones along the way in cinema history. Are there any that you could mention that might have served as inspiration for Night Shift?
I think that the two biggest films that were inspirational to Night Shift would be, I mean, Hitchcock's Psycho, of course, and Mario Bava's Kill Baby Kill.
Yeah.
We're massive Bava fans, so we just like soak up everything about him and really sort of like love his technical craft and sort of apply that a bit to ours as well. And then also I would say a good heavy dose of Giallo cinema. That's been a massive influence for us.
Yeah, I would say definitely with Kill Baby Kill by Bava. I think what struck us so much about that film is that it's more than a ghost story.
Yeah.
And it's such an effective ghost story. I mean, everyone talks about Black Sunday and Black Sabbath, but Kill Baby Kill is just a masterpiece. And so that was very influential in Night Shift because we're dealing with more than ghosts. And also just going to we wanted everything to be practical. I mean, when it came down to stunts and particularly makeup. So even when we were just watching The Prowler or The Burning and looking at Tom Savini's best work, we always wanted the ghosts and what the practical effects to have that kind of effect on an audience. Yeah, and just sort of go back to that old school way of making movies and not relying on CGI.
Very cool. And I love hearing that, of course, as an old school horror fan, and I think most of our audience are going to love hearing that and seeing that in Night Shift. Do you foresee that being the way forward for you guys, doing more genre film and keeping it old school, like you said?
Absolutely.
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 Yeah. I mean,
always, I think.
Always, yeah. We just want to keep making more horror films and not be afraid, in this climate, in this day and age, to use the word horror, because sometimes, people always hate thrillers and what have you, but because there's nothing taboo about it, there shouldn't be anyway. But to keep making more horror films, hopefully bigger in scale, as we go along. Night Shift was our first one. But yeah, definitely in terms of the aesthetic and the techniques, to rely on practical effects and what have you, because the audiences know. I mean, if you see CGI blood on screen, it's a cheap knockoff. And so even in Night Shift, I mean, there's a couple of instances when we used blood and we only had one chance to get it right, and everybody was like, "Are you sure this is going to take a couple of hours? It's going to affect our runtime, affect our shooting schedule." And we were like, "We have to. It has to be as practical as possible, because the audience can tell." And therefore, and it gets that visceral reaction from the audience. And again, going back to the movies that we all love, watching them in the 80s and 90s, that's the reaction that we got. So we don't want to, let the audience down in that way.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I love hearing that. And again, I know other fans of the genre, and our audience is going to love hearing that. And like I said, as we're speaking, Night Shift is out now. I watched it. I loved it. I recommend it. And I know it's just the beginning of great things to come for you guys. We're going to be watching your career with great interest. And I'm sure we'll be talking again about some other cool projects before long.
We'll always come back, Matt. Whatever you'll have us,
Yeah.
Matt. We'll always come back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Always.
It's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for having us on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we loved it.
It's been my pleasure as well. And I always hate saying goodbye, but since every day is Halloween for us, instead, we always like to just say Happy Halloween.
Happy
Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween, Matt.